We're under fire out here. The hill is pinned down. I think the shooters are missing you all in the warrior. Can you free us up? We're taking casualties down here.
I'll see what I can do.
Too late. I just triggered my detonation harness. In 5 seconds, you and I will both be dead. The entire tower will be vaporized.
Roger that. The fort is secured.
Oni is a game I've wanted to cover for a long time, so long that it was going to be the first video I'd make, and originally that was going to be in late 2018 or early 2019. I love Bungie, that much should be obvious, but this one has always been the odd one out since it wasn't made by Bungie Prime, rather their short-lived offshoot Bungie West. As the story goes, once Oni's development was wrapping up, they got pulled back in favor of helping out what would end up being the bigger game.
They owe it all to the Oni team because before we came up from San Jose, they had no multiplayer, so the multiplayer designer and the multiplayer programmer came from the Oni team.
But Oni itself is still worth checking out as its own game and as a neat little tribute to Ghost in the Shell with flourishes of early to mid-90s anime in general. To start off, I'm playing the Windows standalone version, but there are a few bundles containing the full game, as well as Mac and PlayStation 2 versions, all cheap if you want a physical copy. If you're using the computer versions of the game, it's highly recommended to install the Anniversary Edition patch and Community Launcher, which not only improves compatibility with modern systems, but also functions as a mod manager. I've read there's some problems surrounding the Mac versions of Oni on the most modern macOS X systems due to them not supporting 32-bit applications, but I'm not well versed in that kind of software knowledge at all. For the most part, I imagine you'll either be running the Windows or the PS2 version, so kind of a moot point, but just a heads up. Oni is a single-player, third-person action game focused on melee combat with additional shooting gameplay, and honestly, I kind of dig it. It definitely has problems, but through those issues, there's a solid groundwork here that unfortunately will never get expanded upon. Now, you can point to my Bungie bias, to which I say, yeah, that's right, I'm being a bit more generous than I probably should be. However, I genuinely think that given more time for fine-tuning, this game would have stood out more as a classic because the base is solid, and what is there works really well. When it runs at its peak, it is a damn fun game with its fighting and overall tone and writing that screams old Bungie. Moving around is easy enough, but startup animations are heavily used, so it's not as instant as other games. For example, here I am moving around in a circle. Konako takes the time to shift her weight, and that will play out both visually and mechanically as you won't move at full speed until the animation finishes. For the most part, this isn't an issue, as when you're fighting indoors or on level ground, you'll subconsciously work around this, but unfortunately there are platforming segments and the game's movement does not play well with these. Any sort of actual gaps you have to jump should be studied for a moment to make sure how much momentum you need to clear it, and be prepared to stop immediately if there are multiple gaps in a row. The easier platforming is when there's no gaps but you do have to jump over stuff, and this happens a couple of times with these conduits you have to run on and avoid the electric pulses. You activate timers and have a set limit of minimal pulses before they resume their normal pattern, which will kill you, but you usually have enough time to sprint across. Remember to always be careful around ledges, even if you want the advantage of fighting near them to throw off enemies for insta-kills. All of that said, sometimes the platforming physics break and it works in your favor. The worst are these laser sections. Fuck these. I know, take your time to find the right moment to slip through, but even then, due to the way emotion works, I'd trip one when I thought I'd be safe and then get murdered by turrets or gas. Thankfully, the game usually puts a save point right after the big laser sections, so when you get past, you're all clear, and there's not too many of them, but there are enough to gripe about, and the patterns start to get real obtuse near the end. The core aspect of combat is hand-to-hand fighting, in which you have two attack actions, punching with left click, and kicking with right. Stringing together different attacks makes different combos, and taking these and combining them with movement, proximity, and crouching, there's a whole lot of options to take down enemies. Many are available to use whenever, but some are context specific, like this flash kick I'm not even sure how I did, but hey, there you go. You can do standard punch-punch-kick combos, throws, disarms if the enemy has a gun, uppercuts, and spinning kicks. You also have the ability to block, and it's the most important tool you have, but the way it's implemented is kind of weird. You do nothing. No inputs. This screams against everything I've been taught from fighting games as well as any other action game where you have to hold or press something, but nope. Just face the enemy and let them hit you, and you're good. The tutorial is very good at explaining the basics, but you'll have to look at the move list and the diary to begin to fully understand what you can do. And even then, some you may find out in the middle of a fight. I do have a minor nitpick. These neck-breaking moves do a whole lot of damage, but I feel like they should be insta-kills. I mean, look at this. I should have dropped this guy for good, but he gets right back up only to take a punch and then decide he's knocked out. They are also really easy to do since all you have to do is run up at a guy and click and he'll get thrown, so I get it for balancing, but maybe make them conditional to where they are insta-kills and they only activate after enough damage has been done. I think this can actually happen, as there's one grab where you come from behind someone and dislocate both of their arms, and in every case that I got that one out, they stayed down. The gunplay is unfortunately not as fluid as the fighting. You can only carry one gun at a time, and either have it drawn to use or put away for the melee combat. There are 2 types of ammunition used for the mini firearms, so while choosing which gun is the right option for the path ahead requires some thought, picking up every single ammo pack is easy enough. Shooting is off, but not unplayable. I think mouse acceleration has something to do with it, but each gun has an effective range, and when you're close to enemies you'll get a bit of an aim assist that is great for a controller, but on mouse can get distracting. Reloading half-filled magazines does lead you to losing that ammo, so break that habit as soon as possible. I can't believe how many times I screwed up and did that, leading to a much smaller supply of bullets than I should have had. I've read that if you get hit during reloads you lose the mag, but I can't recall if this ever happened. Either way, it would be advised to reload only when you have some distance between enemies and yourself. Each gun has a data entry in your diary giving a quick description as to how they work. You have your standard handgun and SMG, and the plasma rifle and a couple of explosive-based guns, but 2 stood out to me. The Mercury Bow, a railgun that shoots frozen mercury projectiles that kills most enemies in 1 shot and all non-boss enemies in 2. The description of the weapon states that most of the weapon's damage is from the initial impact, but additionally the target dies due to mercury poisoning as it melts inside of the body, which... ouch. The second one is the Screaming Cell, a weapon that shoots out a capsule containing a flying creature that inflicts damage on everything in its range. Enemies wielding this were always a welcome sight, since they'd often be in groups and the creature hunts down anybody that it's close to, not just you. It won't target the shooter, but it will damage them, so the best thing to do is just get them to shoot and let the little guy go to town. Health works by picking up med kits and using them at your discretion, though the healing isn't instant so it's not wise to use them in the middle of the fight, but to retreat and heal a bit. You're giving 3/4 of a circle for 100%, but the last quarter is reserved for a temporary overcharge that grants you additional strength, boosting defensive and offensive capabilities. Use this. Do not make my mistake and use hypos only for healing. The difficulty is balanced around overcharging, and you will have that much harder of a time if you don't activate it, especially during the later levels. Enemies and friendly NPCs give out hypo sprays much more than ammo drops, which I thought was weird at first, but now that I know the game wants you to use them, it makes a lot more sense. Also, each successful hit generates a colored impact graphic based on their health left, with green being in good health scaling through orange to red. A final hit produces a bright red one, and this shows the enemy is knocked out. The same visual effects go for your health too, so it's easy to see how you're doing for health in the middle of a battle if you're taking hits. The HUD is a little weird at first, but once you understand what each part is, it's pretty easy to glance and know. Health and shields or invisibility duration are on the right, and the ammo and weapon readout are on the left. Your current objective compass is also on the ammo counter, describing direction, elevation, and distance, as when you get closer, the yellow line begins to increase in size. The fact of the distance not being measured out with numbers like normal does make it a little less intuitive than other HUDs, but again, once you get a feeling for it, it's fun. Enemies are alright, though the placement of some can get annoying real fast, especially in the final missions. They come in different classes, some already armed with guns, though everyone can pick up firearms off the ground. In one-on-ones, you're usually overpowered to take them out, but be careful and remember to block and analyze their attacks for openings. Otherwise, you're going to be taking a lot more damage than you should, and end up using hypos for healing rather than overcharging. Friendly NPCs are scattered throughout levels and will either provide information or usually an item. Some may even fight alongside you, though look out. Friendly fire is enabled at all times, so they may hit you on accident, and if you hit them, they may come after you for it. There's a few boss fights in Oni, with most of them being one-on-one battles against strong enemies, and a few being laser dodging based puzzles. This isn't really a boss battle, but I guess it is? The first normal boss battle is against one of Muro's higher ranking soldiers, Barabbas. You'll fight him twice, with the first being much easier than the second, though both battles aren't too difficult. The first comes at the beginning of Mission 3, where he's standing guard outside of the biology facility and you need to get in. While it would be good to learn how to fight against one strong enemy, the easy way out is to knock him down and take his wave motion cannon and use it against him. The second comes at the end of Mission 6, where you chase him down to the roof of the TCTF HQ. This fight isn't as easy since the wave motion cannon doesn't work as well due to Barabbas's much greater healing capabilities. I thought, well, I've died falling off the edges before, maybe I could cheese this by knocking him off, and that seemed like it would work, but the devs took that into account. Barabbas will just fly back up with his jetpack and re-engage. The jetpack is shown during the end of the first fight as his method of retreat, so I can't be mad at them for having it as a you think you're clever workaround. Mukade represents the other major boss battle. At the end of Mission 10, you find yourself once again on a rooftop against an enemy with nowhere to run, and he'll prove to be a lot more troubling than Barabbas. Mukade's main gimmick is his stealth and teleportation, which means once he's taken enough damage, we'll pull back and re-cloak in order to get the drop on you. You can make out his shape though, so his constant hit and run tactics aren't too bad. What is that bad is the stupid red projectile thing that homes in on you, and frankly, I got sick of this to the point where I just never let him get up to get the chance to shoot another one off. As an aside, during one of the attempts at his fight, I did manage to get him to teleport outside of the arena, where his AI broke and he just stood there until the red thing got me. Visually, it sure is a 2001 PC game as far as its fidelity is concerned, with models being appropriate for the era, nothing groundbreaking. Its art direction is another story altogether, being split down the middle of Eastern and Western design choices. Obviously, there's a lot of the anime and manga aesthetic that the game is going for, with Masamune Shiro's works being the primary inspiration for just about everything. However, there's a bit of what feels like Western comic flair to me, and it works. Sometimes anyways. I feel like a couple of the portraits need to be touched up, but otherwise the characters maintain a very distinct look. The atmosphere is always very oppressive, with outside environments usually covered in night and buildings lit by harsh lighting. Speaking of, while running around levels, you're going to find yourself in some decent-sized stretches of open area. Many of the environments were reportedly designed by actual architects, and while the buildings do reflect this pretty well, with sensible room layouts, outside is usually massive and doesn't have a lot going on. That said, Oni is a game that rewards exploration with hidden supplies such as ammunition clips and hypos, and the occasional force field, so you are encouraged to run around these large areas in search of anything. Sound design is about on par with everything else, being pretty alright. The voice acting can range, but it usually stays near the high end of things, with the best work being handled with Amanda Wynn Lee and Pete Stacker doing his best Pete Stacker. And of course, the usual Bungie crowd of who could we get around the office to do some lines works out really well.
Who are you?
The person that just saved your life?
Right, yeah, look, I'm sorry, it's been kind of a rough day.
Tell me about it.
Run while you still can!
Why did you build it in the first place?
Well, you know.
Forget it, just get out of here.
Here! Ah!
Regarding sound effects, alright, I know it's the same company working from the same sound library, but having played Halo for over 15 years at this point, some of this became almost too distracting. It was a fun little game to see how much I could recognize and match right off the bat. Also, I noticed that while Michael Salvatore and Marty O'Donnell are credited with some of the soundtrack, there's a bunch performed by Power of Seven, a name that's come up if you've ever played Marathon 2 or Infinity. I never really dug too much into it before now, so I did a little research, and it turns out that Power of Seven was a musical publisher that was led by Paul Sebastian of Psychosonic fame. You learn something new every day. Finally, there's the story, and there's quite a bit to unpack. Oni places you in the role of Konako, a rookie agent of the Technological Crimes Task Force. She's been trained throughout her life to be an unstoppable force for the TCTF, given almost superhuman strength, stamina, and agility. During levels, you'll be assisted via your support team comprised of 3 major characters: Griffin, Konako's commanding officer and a regional director of the TCTF; Shinatama, an android referred to as an SLD or simulated life doll, with a neural link to Konako who monitors her progress and update objectives. Finally, there's Dr. Care, a scientist with personal connections to Konako and seems to have her safety as his #1 concern. With them and the rest of the TCTF as your allies, Konako is charged with stopping the Syndicate, a worldwide criminal organization primarily dealing in narcotics and weapons. The Syndicate is led by a man only known as Muro, who serves as the primary antagonist throughout Oni. From here on out, spoilers. Skip to the following time code if you don't want to hear them. For the first half of the game, much of the synopsis I just said remains true. Konako runs a few busts and attempts to try and catch Muro, whose real target is a biological facility housing something that he needs. After giving chase through an airport, Muro escapes, but he takes notice of the agent, who is then informed specifically about Konako's link to Shinatama. He resolves to steal the android, and in a coordinated attack on the TCTF HQ, manages to abduct her and begins an interrogation to find out more about Konako. This action enrages Konako to the point of disobeying Griffin's direct orders not to go after them, and further grows tension between the two. Konako attempts a rescue and finds Shinatama beaten close to death, who begins to tell Konako the truth about her past.
What did they do to you?
You're not who you think you are.
Griffin and his technicians pick up both of their signals at this point. Up until now, Griffin and Dr. Care have been monitoring Konako's vitals during her missions, specifically something called Deoden latency. During periods of intense adrenaline, it rises higher and can spike after particular instances of high-impact combat. Konako's latency has been climbing ever since the game started, concerning Griffin heavily, who's fearing she's about to go wild and become an uncontrollable liability. He decides the best course of action is to use a bomb inside Shinatama to take them both out, ignoring Dr. Care's cries for reason. The bomb is activated, and Shinatama uses the last of her strength to delay the detonation, allowing for Konako to escape. After evading TCTF forces, in addition to the Syndicate, the support team once again picks up her signal, alerting them to her surviving the blast.
All units, Konako has gone rogue. She is a Class B threat, and this is a Code Red situation.
Take her in, or take her down.
From here on out, she has no allies, and begins her search into her past with her real name, Mai Hasegawa. Mai makes her way to the regional state building where her file is being stored, but it gets stolen by Muro's men, and she gives chase across the rooftops. After confronting and defeating Mukade, Mai gets the disk full of her information and travels to her father's abandoned lab. It is here that she finds his diary and learns about her parents, the world outside of the protected urban areas, and how her mother died. But most importantly, she learns her mother's maiden name, Care. Still unsure of what exactly Dr. Care and her father were working on together, she's interrupted by Muro suddenly appearing and the geometry of the room changing rapidly.
You really don't know?
Tell me.
Defeating this hallucination expands into a much more detailed dream sequence, which I'm going to admit, I'm always kind of a sucker for when these things happen in a game. She sees an apparition of Shinatama who is trying to lead her through the labyrinth, while battling Syndicate enemies littered throughout. Mai confronts Griffin and his men, which at this point was fairly cathartic, before moving towards the end of the dream in which she fights herself. Rather, her past self that the TCTF created, Konako.
Hello, Mai. What? Mai Hasegawa, that's your name, isn't it?
Beating her wakes Mai up, and she seeks out the other lead she has in Dr. Care. Mai finds Care and finally learns the truth about two things. She has a brother,
My brother?
Muro,
You gotta be kidding.
and why she's different. She's implanted with a symbiote referred to as a chrysalis. The chrysalis replaced the host cells with its own over time and as a healing response to injury. While it does result in a much more aggressive host, the chrysalis cannot change their personality, ending in only a stronger version of themselves, not taking them over. After explaining that last bit, a soldier comes in and attempts to shoot Mai, but Care sacrifices himself and takes the frozen mercury cartridge like a champ. Mai vows revenge on the TCTF for stealing her past and now her uncle. She raids TCTF HQ alone and breaks into Griffin's bunker after he takes shelter in it, only to find the remains of Shinatama still alive and powering the defense system. Shinatama begs for a friend to kill her, and once Mai shuts down all of the conduits, she breaks free and heads towards Griffin. Griffin then shoots the walking corpse of an android before Mai grabs the pistol, and you're given an option. Either kill Griffin or leave him. The only thing this changes is the final boss in the next mission, and while shooting Griffin is the easiest thing in the world to do right now, the final fight is much easier leaving him alive. A couple of days pass, and Mai travels to a Syndicate base located in the mountains containing a dish that has access to the atmospheric conversion centers where Muro's plan is finally laid out. Get the pollution treatment systems to cause more pollution, resulting in people coming to him for chrysalis implanting so they can survive at the cost of serving under him. The only solution available is to send a signal to destroy the ACCs in order to maintain the current levels rather than speed things up. And once Mai does so, Muro makes his appearance. If you had let Griffin live, at this point the fight is stupid easy. If you killed Griffin, Muro arrives alone, but he finishes his transformation into a monstrous form, and this fight is a bit harder. Either way, Mai kills Muro, and the consequences remain the same. The ACCs are gone, and humanity will have to adapt in order to survive. I truly do see the good in Oni too much to let its bad parts detract from the experience, but definitely not everyone's going to feel the same. I recommend this game if you're still curious after all of this, but if you do get too frustrated, that's completely understandable. There was a sequel being worked on by Angel Studios, now Rockstar San Diego, but it ceased development ages ago. Take-Two Interactive still owns the rights to Oni, though at the time of this video, no digital re-release has ever occurred. It's a shame about the sequel because I wonder what would have happened had the game gone through with a different developer. Not meant to be, I suppose. Thank you for watching, and an extra thank you to OniGalore, an excellent resource site for Oni and my aid for researching plot details and additional materials. There's a lot to the world and development of Oni, and this site has extensive documentation on just about everything, so if you're still curious about this game and the setting, I highly recommend there and reading up. There's one more Bungie thing I want to talk about in the future, but that's going to be down the road a ways, so until that point, see you Starside.